Alright everyone, now we have to talk about the so-called Wayward Republicans in the U.S. House voting to establish a supposedly bipartisan commission to investigate the supposed insurrection months ago at the U.S. Capitol. Now first and foremost, let's clear up the obvious mythology. There was no insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. A group of largely unarmed people staged a riot, and some of them were guilty certainly of property damage. But there was no insurrection. The idea that a few thousand people, again largely unarmed individuals, are going to attempt to overthrow the U.S. government, that's just not real. It's not realistic. It's a propagandistic mythology. What really happened is that Trump held a speech, told people to go home with peace in their hearts, and some of them spurged out. That's basically what it boils down to. Now, the same legacy media calling that an insurrection, because several people did die, including Ashley Babbitt, say her name. Keep in mind, another unarmed individual who was not committing any violent felony when she was shot unceremoniously and then laid out to die. Here's the thing. What ended up actually happening was a riot. This is all prefaced on propaganda. But the problem is that Congress is not really capable, just by structure, it doesn't matter who's running it. The U.S. House run by Republicans would be the same level of bias, let's face it. They're not capable of having a bipartisan, independent look into what happened. They're wasting their time. This is a waste of time and money, and it's probably going to turn up. What you're going to end up at the end of the day is the House, which is run by the Democrats, by a narrow majority, is going to narrowly find that Trump was responsible and evil, and they'll retroactively censure him or something, and then nothing will happen. But, I mean, we can look at Trump in his own words. Not once during his speech at the Capitol on that day, prefaced before the rioting that happened, not a single thing that he said was violent. Meanwhile, the same legacy media hacks, and Democrats, of course, and a few of the Republicans, were excusing and even kneeling for all of the riots that were exploding across the United States last year. Those were fiery but mostly peaceful protests, says CNN, when they're standing in front of a burning building. But what happened at the Capitol was shameful, and oh my God, it's an attack on democracy. I would think that dozens of deaths and tens of billions in property damage over the course of several months is more meaningful than one several-hour riot at the Capitol. What, the fact that it's the Capitol all of a sudden is meaningful? Fuck the Capitol. Who cares? It's the people's house anyway. The people bought and paid for it. Most of the people that entered the Capitol that day, unless they were smearing feces or attacking someone, most of those people are guilty of simple trespass. That's it. Maybe disorderly conduct. These are minor charges. They're not going to get thrown in prison for years at a time. Some of them are being held in solitary confinement for excessive periods pending trial because COVID has slowed down the court system, to the point where there are some Republicans with more balls than any of the people on this particular list, link in the description, including, of course, our friend Liz Cheney. There are some of them that are calling that out. The conditions under which some of these people are being held without bail is tantamount to a human rights violation at this point. When you're held in solitary confinement for more than 100 days and you haven't even been convicted of any crime, that's excessive. I'm sorry, but the Constitution clearly makes that illegal. But of course, nobody really is going to speak out about it. These rhino cons that joined this call for a stupid commission to look into a riot, essentially, have thrown their own constituents under the bus. Now, keep in mind, this is something that's important. People need to understand this. Unlike a senator, which is representing a state, and represents the whole constituency therein, and then it's cut and dry what the partisan leanings are, members of the House are based on districts. So Liz Cheney represents, I think in her case she represents Wyoming, and she's on her way out. They're going to kick her aside. Her approval will drop even further on this news. Some of these people probably just represent marginally blue districts while happening to be Republican, and so technically they're doing their job. Voting for this commission, well, if their constituencies mostly Democrats or mostly liberals, certainly they'd want them to vote that way. I have a sneaking suspicion, though, if I went down this list and looked at these districts' demographics, I'd find that at least some of them can be primary to side without too much effort. Likewise, there are Republicans siding with Trump that probably represent those same marginal districts and technically aren't doing their job when they don't vote for the commission. So there is a nuance here that people are forgetting about. Remember, a member of the U.S. House doesn't represent the United States. They don't even represent a state unless they're, I think, again, Liz Cheney or Peter Welch, and I think maybe Alaska. Don't they have a second representative sometimes? Depends on the way the census went. It's ever-shifting. It's a big problem, redistricting things too. But, I mean, it's horseshit. It's a waste of time. There's no insurrection. What insurrection? Oh, they staged an overthrow of the government. No, they went around, wandered around in the building for a few hours, and by and large left under their own volition. That's what happened. Most of these people didn't even have a weapon. Those that did, they didn't have like firearms and cannons and shit like that. That could count as an insurrection. If they were armed similarly to BLM and Antifa, and they had tactical gear and Molotov cocktails, then it would have been an insurrection. That's the funny part. But then it wouldn't get called one. If they burned the Capitol to the ground, well, we gotta hear the legitimate grievances of these people. They're fighting for racial justice. Look at the fucking Wikipedia article for the rioting that's happened over the last year, and they call it a struggle against racial justice and paint it as though it was largely nonviolent. Yeah, nonviolent protest causes billions in damage. Okay, how much damage was done at the Capitol? How much of my tax money went to repairing things there? People, by and large, were just filing around. It almost looked like a tourist club, with the exception of a handful of people that got very, very violent and attempted to break into the inner chambers, and some people got shot. Really, really sad, but I still hear the mythology of that one cop getting beaten to death with a fire extinguisher, even though that never happened. That's all lost in the storytelling. It's like a game of telephone at this point. The legacy media, of course, whipping people into a frenzy. Oh, we're going to have closure. Our democracy was under attack. Now, the people there that were rioting thought they were defending democracy. That's the funny part. In their minds, they were defending democracy against a group of people who just fucked around with an election. That's in their minds, but that's what they believe. Honk, honk. I'm totally not saying that there's any legitimacy to that at all, YouTube. They weren't committing an insurrection, though. Some of them weren't even technically rioters. Okay, they illegally entered the building, but is it still a riot if your basic goal is to walk around and take a selfie? No. Somebody stole Pelosi's laptop. Some doors were broken. Some window panes shattered. One person decided to relieve themselves in the Pelosi's chamber or something like that. That's, taxpayers have to clean that up, but it's not exactly a hyper-violent felony now, is it? It's not the sort of thing that you throw someone in a gulag for. It's like they go to county jail or something. Basic trespass with no aggravating factors, like, he had a gun at the time or something. Just simple trespass without any property damage. How much time do you think these people are actually going to get in jail? Hell, these people that are being held right now without bail pending trial, some of them will get time served. You do realize this, right? And the Democrats, they're going to try to throw the book at these poor people, and at the end of the day, it's just not meaningful. It's a complete waste of fucking time. That's about all. Peace out.